On my 57th birthday, my son looked me straight in the face and said, "Don't contact us again. We can't take this anymore." I asked him why. What happened? But he didn't want to listen. He and his wife just got into the new Porsche Cayenne I had bought for them and drove away from the cafe. But as he pulled out of the parking lot, he had no idea what he had just done. What happened next is a story about what comes when you turn your back on your own father and your family by mistake. If you believe that family should be built on respect, not entitlement, then please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, because I want to know how far this story travels. After they drove off, I just stood there in front of that cafe, holding the small paper bag with the slice of cake I bought myself. It was supposed to be a birthday treat, something simple, something harmless. But instead, I stood there like a man who'd just been pushed off the edge of a cliff and was still trying to understand how he ended up on the ground. The Porsche's taillights disappeared around the corner, and the only thing left was the faint smell of exhaust and the quiet chatter of other customers who were pretending not to stare. I walked back to my truck slowly, each step feeling heavier than it should. My hands were shaking a little, not from anger, but from something deeper, something like disbelief mixed with years of memories I didn't want to think about. When I opened the door and sat inside, the old leather creaked the same way it had for the last 15 years. It was a familiar sound, one that made me feel steadier than I actually was. For a minute, I just sat there with the keys in my hand, staring through the windshield at nothing. I tried to replay the moment, as if I had misheard him or misunderstood something. Maybe I was tired. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe it was a bad joke. But the look in his eyes wasn't a joke. It was cold, final, like he had made up his mind long before he even walked into that cafe. My son, Daniel, had never talked to me like that before. Or maybe he had, and I just never let myself hear it. I started the engine and let it idle while I tried to collect myself. 57 years old, and this was the first birthday in my life that actually felt like some kind of ending. The kind where you don't know what comes after, but you can feel something shifting under your feet. I pulled out of the parking lot slowly and headed toward the main road. The world outside looked normal. Cars passing by, people heading to work, a couple walking their dog like it was just another ordinary morning. But inside, nothing felt normal anymore. The drive home wasn't long, but it felt stretched out. Every red light gave me time to think, and thinking was the last thing I wanted. It made me replay every moment of Daniel's life. Football games, school plays, the night he got into his first car accident and called me, terrified he had ruined everything. I remembered how proud he was when he graduated, how nervous he was when he proposed to Lily, how excited he sounded when they found their first apartment and I helped them move in. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else's family now. My house came into view as I turned into the driveway, the same brick home my wife and I bought years before she passed. The windows reflected the morning sun, and for a second, the place looked warm and alive. But the moment I stepped inside, it felt empty in a way I hadn't noticed before. Maybe because now I finally understood what I had been trying to ignore. This house didn't have a family in it anymore. It just had me. I set the paper bag down on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it was something from another life. Cake on your birthday shouldn't feel like a reminder of everything you've lost, but it did. I walked to the sink, let the water run, cupped my hands, and splashed my face. The cold woke me up just enough to think clearly. I dried off with the kitchen towel and pulled out a chair at the small table. I sat down and just breathed. It wasn't until my phone buzzed that I reached for it, hoping maybe Daniel had realized how harsh he'd been. But the screen showed a notification from the bank, just the usual monthly statement. Nothing from him. Nothing from Lily. I put the phone down, and then something inside me finally shifted. For years, I had been the one holding everything together. Birthdays, holidays, emergencies, bills, car repairs, down payments. Every time Daniel needed something, I was there. Every time Lily hinted at something she wanted, I was the one who found a way to make it happen. I told myself it was what a good father did. I told myself I was helping them build their future. I never once thought that giving too much could ruin someone. But now I was starting to understand. They weren't drowning because life was hard. They were drowning because I kept carrying them, and somewhere along the way, they forgot they were supposed to stand on their own feet. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. The backyard was quiet, the trees still bare from winter. The wind pushed the branches gently, like the world was trying to tell me to move too. I didn't reach for my keys right away. I just sat there, feeling that quiet settle around me. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about thinking of myself. I didn't feel guilty about wanting respect instead of being treated like an ATM with a pulse. When I finally did stand up, everything felt clearer. My hands were steady. My breathing was slow and controlled. The disappointment was still there, but something had changed. Something firm, something solid, something that felt like the part of me I had forgotten to use. I grabbed my phone again, not to call Daniel, not to apologize, not to beg for an explanation. I went to my contacts, scrolled past his name, and stopped at another one. Someone who had helped me more times than I could count. Someone who always told me the truth, even when it hurt. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear. When he answered, his voice was calm and steady, just like always. "Mark speaking." "Mark," I said quietly, "it's me." There was a pause, the kind that comes when someone senses something serious before you even explain it. "What's wrong?" I took a breath. "I need to talk to you. Today." "All right," he said. "Come by the office. I'll clear my afternoon." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Thank you." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. That was the moment the story truly started. The moment when I realized my son hadn't just hurt me. He had handed me the key to something he never expected, the chance to change everything. And I was about to take it. I left the house not long after speaking with Mark. The drive to his office took about 20 minutes, just enough time for my thoughts to settle into something sharper than anger. I wasn't shaking anymore, and I wasn't confused. I felt steady, like I'd finally stepped into a role I should have taken on years ago. The morning sun was climbing higher as I pulled into the small parking lot beside his building, a modest two-story place made of old brick and clean windows. Mark had been my accountant and close friend for nearly 25 years. He'd helped me start my business, helped me survive the recession, and helped me navigate life after my wife passed. If anyone understood the blueprint of my financial world, it was him. When I walked into his office, the receptionist gave me a warm smile and told me to go right in. Mark was sitting behind his desk, glasses on, sleeves rolled up, and a stack of papers spread out in front of him like he'd been expecting a storm. He looked up when I stepped inside. "You look like a man who didn't get the birthday he deserved," he said. I sat down across from him, exhaling slowly. Something like that. He didn't push for details right away. He just leaned back, folded his arms, and studied me. "So tell me what happened." I told him everything. Not with emotion, but with the same tone someone uses to read a weather report. Calm, factual, unavoidable. I described the moment Daniel told me not to contact him. I described Lily standing behind him with that stiff little smile she used when she wanted to seem polite, but couldn't hide the contempt underneath. I told him about the Porsche. I told him how they drove away like I was nothing more than a problem they'd finally solved. And then I told him what I wanted to do next. Mark listened carefully, not interrupting once. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I knew something like this would come eventually," he said. "Not because you're a bad father, but because you're a generous one. Too generous." I didn't argue. There was nothing left to defend. He opened a drawer, took out a thick folder, and placed it on the desk between us. My name was printed on the front. "Inside here is every asset you control. Properties, accounts, the trust, the investments, the insurance policies, everything. I've kept it updated." He tapped the folder with one finger. "If you want to make changes, it won't be difficult. You've structured things in a way that gives you full authority." "I know," I said quietly. "I just never planned to use it like this." He gave me a sympathetic look. "No parent plans for this." We went through the documents together. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was business, a kind of business I'd avoided for years because I thought kindness was more important. I realized, sitting there with Mark, that kindness without boundaries isn't compassion. It's surrender. And I had surrendered long enough. Mark turned a page in the folder and pointed to a section with Daniel's name. "Here's the trust distribution schedule. Monthly support, vehicle leases, property maintenance, emergency funds, discretionary spending. It all goes through your authorization, even if they don't think about it." "They definitely don't think about it," I muttered. "They think it just appears." Mark nodded. "Most people only notice money when it stops moving. That's when reality hits." He paused. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm sure." He nodded again, more firmly this time, and began pulling the documents that needed signatures. The printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting out pages one after another. I signed everything he placed in front of me. Freezing accounts, suspending disbursements, reclaiming titles, ending leases. reassigning access permissions. Every signature felt cleaner than the last. Not revenge, not cruelty, just closure. The final line I signed was a directive transferring the Porsche lease back to my name. Mark slid it away and sat back in his chair with a long exhale. All right, he said. Everything is in motion. By the end of the day, nothing will be accessible to them. I nodded. Good. He looked at me carefully. What do you think they'll do when they find out? I shrugged. Call me. Scream at me. Blame me. Maybe show up at my door. I don't know. And what will you do? My answer came easily. Nothing. They're the ones who cut me off, not the other way around. I'm just honoring their request. Mark gave a short, dry laugh. Some lessons are expensive. This one will be, I said. Very. I stood up, shook his hand, and thanked him. He told me to keep him updated, and I promised I would. When I stepped back outside into the parking lot, the air felt lighter. Not happy, just calm. A different kind of calm than before. The kind that comes from making a decision you can finally live with. I got in my truck, adjusted the mirror, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Across the street, a young father was putting his toddler into a car seat, laughing as the kid kept throwing a stuffed dinosaur onto the pavement. The man didn't look wealthy. He didn't look stressed. He looked present, like someone who understood the weight and privilege of being a father. I used to look like that. I wondered when it changed. Maybe the change wasn't even in me. Maybe it was in Daniel. Or both of us. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something made me check. A message flashed on the screen. Not from Daniel, not from Lily, but from the leasing company. Vehicle access and billing update. Your Porsche Cayenne lease account has been successfully transferred to the primary holder. Effective immediately. I stared at the message for a second, then put my phone down and drove. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was simply the beginning of consequences they had invited into their own lives. They wanted space. Now they had it. And as I headed home, I realized something important. This wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. It was just the moment when everything started to shift, slowly, quietly, and then all at once. By the time I arrived home, the sun had shifted enough to cast long shadows across the front lawn. It gave the house a calmer look than I felt. I parked the truck, walked up the steps, and unlocked the door with a sense of finality, like I was closing one chapter and sharpening the edge of the next. Inside, the house was still and quiet. I took off my jacket, hung it by the door, and set my keys on the counter. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but I wasn't the same. Something inside me had settled into place with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't turn on the TV or the radio. I just listened to the kind of silence you hear when you've finally stopped running from your own thoughts. It didn't take long for my phone to buzz again. This time it wasn't a company notification, it was Daniel. His name flashed across the screen like a reminder of everything I'd spent years enabling. I didn't answer. I just watched the call ring out until it stopped. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. Same name, same attempt, same refusal. I set the phone down and folded my arms. He didn't call because he missed me. He didn't call because he felt guilty. He called because something had already changed in his world. Maybe he went to get gas and the card didn't work. Maybe he got one of those suspended account notifications from the bank. Maybe Lily tried to order something online and the transaction was declined. Whatever it was, it didn't take long for the ripple effect to reach them. The phone buzzed again, this time a text. I glanced at the notification preview. Dad, can you call me? Something is going on with the accounts. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew how this pattern worked. First confusion, then frustration, then anger, then desperation. It was predictable, almost mechanical. I left the phone where it was and went out to the backyard. The air had that early evening coolness that comes after a long day. I walked along the stone path my wife and I had built together years ago, the one she always wanted lined with lavender. The plants had grown thick and healthy. I brushed my hand against them as I walked, letting the scent rise in the air. It grounded me, reminded me of a time when things were simple, when Daniel was still a boy who thought his father could fix anything. Halfway down the path, the phone buzzed again in my pocket. This time I took it out and checked the screen. For missed calls. 2 texts. All from Daniel. I scrolled through without opening them. Dad, something's wrong. Can you call me back? Cards aren't working. Is the trust having issues? We need to talk right now? The last message was almost funny in a sad kind of way. For years, Anytime I wanted to talk, they were busy. But when their world started cracking, suddenly everything was urgent. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking toward the shed at the edge of the yard. The shed was old, but sturdy, another project my wife and I built together. Inside, I kept my tools, my workbench, the things that made sense to me when nothing else did. I stepped inside and turned on the small overhead light. The familiar smell of wood shavings and oil filled the air. I grabbed a sandpaper block from the shelf and picked up a piece of cedar I'd been shaping the week before. Working with my hands always helped me think. It wasn't about the project itself. It was about the rhythm, the control, the simple cause and effect. While I worked, the phone buzzed again. Then again. I didn't stop. I let each vibration fade into the background like distant thunder. Eventually, I set the wood down and wiped my hands on a rag. I took the phone out once more and stared at the screen. This time there were messages from Lily too. "Hi, this is Lily. Could you please call us? We're having a problem with the mortgage autopay. Your son is really stressed right now. Please respond." That last message made me pause, not because I felt sympathy, but because of how carefully she phrased it. Your son. Not Daniel. Not my husband. She wanted to remind me of my responsibility, the same responsibility she had benefited from for years. Responsibility without respect. A debt I was always expected to pay. I put the phone away and turned off the shed light. The evening sky had turned orange, fading into a soft purple near the horizon. It was the kind of sunset that made you stop for a second, whether you wanted to or not. I stood there and watched it, letting the quiet settle around me again. There was no guilt, no second-guessing, just a calm certainty that I was finally doing what should have been done a long time ago. By the time I walked back to the house, the phone had rung another 3 times. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I already knew the rhythm of the storm that was building on their side of the world. And I knew it was only going to get worse before it got better. Inside, I washed up, changed into a clean shirt, and made myself a simple dinner. While I ate, the phone buzzed once more. A long vibration this time, a voicemail. I let it go. I didn't want to hear it yet. I wanted the world to stay quiet for just a little while longer. After cleaning the kitchen, I finally picked up the phone and tapped the voicemail icon. There was one new message from Daniel, left a few minutes earlier. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. His voice came through shaky, tight, trying to sound calm, but failing. "Dad, it's me. We need to talk. There's an issue with the accounts, the cards, everything. I don't know what's happening. Just call me, okay? I'm sure it's just a mistake." A mistake. Of course. To him, everything was always a mistake until someone else fixed it. Usually me. I deleted the message without saving it. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a quiet understanding that this was only the beginning. What I didn't know then, what I would soon find out, was that while Daniel and Lily were scrambling in confusion, the first real consequences were already rolling toward them faster than either of them could imagine. The next morning started like any other. I woke up at 6, brewed my coffee, and stepped out onto the back porch to watch the sun rise over the ridge. It was quiet, cool, and peaceful, exactly the kind of morning I needed. But as soon as I checked my phone, I knew the peace wasn't going to last. Overnight, there were 9 missed calls from Daniel and 4 from numbers I didn't recognize. The messages started tame and got worse as the hours passed. "Dad, can you call me? Please answer. We're having an issue with the mortgage. The bank says they can't reach you. Dad, seriously, what's going on? Call me." I scrolled through them slowly while sipping my coffee, not hurrying, not rushing. This wasn't my emergency. It wasn't even my responsibility. It was theirs. I put the phone down on the patio table and leaned back in the chair, letting the cool air hit my face. For once, letting someone else sit with their own problems felt like relief. Around 8:30, as I finished breakfast, the phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from an unknown number. The transcription preview said, "This is regarding your son's account." I deleted it. Not my account. Not my problem. I set the phone aside and went back to my routine. If there was one thing the last few years had taught me, it was that routine keeps you steady when everything else tries to pull you into chaos. At 10, I decided to go into town for fresh lumber and a few supplies for a project I'd been meaning to start. The drive was quiet enough that I didn't think about Daniel or Lily at all, until I parked and saw 3 new messages waiting. The first was from Daniel. "Dad, the electric bill bounced. Why is everything shutting down?" The second was from Lily. "Can you please call us? The building office needs to talk to you." And the third, That was the one that confirmed exactly where they were in the spiral. We might lose the apartment. Please call me back. I stared at that message for a moment, then put the phone in my pocket and walked into the hardware store. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't revenge. It was simply letting reality do the teaching I had avoided for too long. I picked up the supplies I needed, made small talk with the cashier, and drove home. When I got back, there was one new voicemail from the property manager of their building. The man sounded polite but blunt. He said he had tried contacting Daniel and Lily, but since the lease was tied to the trust, he needed confirmation from me about the missed payments. His tone made it clear. They were already behind, and not by a small amount. I deleted that one too. By noon, I could tell the situation had escalated. My phone buzzed almost nonstop. Calls, texts, voicemails, a stream of noise from the people who had told me, less than a day before, that they couldn't take me anymore. Funny how fast they found space when they needed something, and just as fast as they ran out of it when they didn't. I muted the device and went out back to work on the new bench I was building. The sky was bright and clear, and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass. I lost myself in the work, letting hours pass without checking the phone once. It was almost 5 o'clock by the time I set the tools down and finally glanced at the screen again. 22 missed calls, 13 texts, 3 voicemails. The texts told me everything I needed to know. The bank froze the account. We can't pay the car note. Are you doing this? Why? Dad, answer your phone. This is serious. We need you. Lily is freaking out. Please help us. And one, from Lily again. If you don't call us back, we don't know what we're supposed to do. They're talking about repossession. Repossession. I exhaled slowly. I knew what that meant. They'd reached the point where the first in-person consequence had arrived. And right on cue, my voicemail confirmed it. Daniel's voice sounded frantic, the calm facade gone. Dad, call me back now. They're towing the Kian. The guy is saying there's nothing he can do. This has to be a mistake. Please call me. As I listened, I could practically picture the scene. Daniel running out to the street in a panic, Lily behind him in her expensive robe, both of them trying to negotiate with a tow truck driver who had heard every excuse in the book. Their luxury car hooked up and pulled away right in front of their neighbors. All because the gravity they'd ignored for years finally caught up with them. I set the phone down and took a breath. No guilt, no satisfaction, just inevitability. Actions have consequences, and so do words. That night, I made a simple dinner and sat at the dining table with a small lamp on, the rest of the house dim. The silence felt different now, less like an empty space and more like a reset. Halfway through eating, the phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. Daniel's voice had changed again, anger layered over fear. Dad, this isn't funny. You can't just shut everything off. We have responsibilities. You can't do this to us. But I wasn't doing anything to them. I was simply stopping what I'd been doing for too long. The second voicemail came 10 minutes later. This time his voice cracked. Dad, please just talk to us. We're trying to figure this out. Everything is falling apart. I didn't respond. Instead, I cleaned up, washed the dishes, and went to bed early for the first time in months. As I lay there in the dark, I realized something I hadn't noticed until that moment. I wasn't waiting for their approval, their gratitude, or their apologies anymore. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting on them at all. The only thing I was waiting for, whether I admitted it or not, was the moment they'd finally stop calling. The next morning, I woke up to the kind of weather that makes you want to stay in bed, gray light leaking through the curtains, the air still enough to feel heavy. I sat on the edge of the mattress for a moment before standing up, listening to that quiet hum of the house. It felt calm, predictable, steady. I made coffee, opened the blinds, and checked the clock. 7:30. For years, this was about the time Daniel would text me something trivial, football scores, a random photo, a link to some car he wanted. It used to feel like connection. Now I understood it was just convenience. When the convenience disappeared, so did he. I didn't check my phone until after breakfast. I'd stopped giving it priority. But when I picked it up, the screen lit up like a warning light. 43 missed calls, 22 messages, and 5 voicemails. They were coming in faster now, like someone trying to patch a sinking ship with their bare hands. I scrolled through the messages without opening them. The preview lines told the whole story. The landlord is threatening eviction. They say we're 2 payments behind. We need to talk about the trust. Dad, answer me. This is out of control. Please don't ignore us. They showed up again. We can't deal with this. I set the phone down. I knew I wasn't going to respond, but I also knew this level of panic meant the pressure was building faster than I expected. I stepped outside onto the porch with my mug and let the cold air hit me. I could hear the wind moving through the trees, a slow, steady sound that made everything feel grounded. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, Daniel and Lily were probably pacing through their apartment, doors slamming, voices raised, both of them realizing that their life wasn't just interrupted, it was cracking apart piece by piece. Around 9, the phone rang again, this time from a number I did recognize. Their building manager. I silenced the call and let it go to voicemail. He left a message explaining the situation in that overly calm, practiced voice landlords use when they've dealt with too many angry tenants. The gist was simple. The rent hadn't been paid for 2 months, the trust wasn't responding, and they needed direction immediately. If they didn't receive funds in 72 hours, they would issue a formal notice to vacate. I deleted the message without hesitation. At 10:30, I drove to the grocery store in town. I needed a few things: vegetables, coffee filters, a new pair of gloves. While grabbing a cart, I felt the phone buzzing again. Not vibrating, buzzing, nonstop. I checked quickly, more out of habit than concern. The newest preview text came from Lily. Daniel is panicking. We can't cover anything this month. Can we please talk? Just 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Funny how a person who had no time for you suddenly had endless room on their schedule when the money stopped flowing. I put the phone in my pocket and went on with my shopping. Just like that. Normal. Simple. Quiet. I didn't rush. I didn't feel guilty. I moved at my usual pace, and the world didn't collapse. That alone felt like a small kind of victory. Back home, I unpacked the groceries and made lunch. Halfway through eating, another voicemail came in. This one from one of those numbers people use when they expect to be blocked. I almost ignored it, but something told me to check. I listened. It was Daniel. He wasn't angry this time. He wasn't pretending to be calm. He sounded exhausted. The voice of a man who finally realized that consequences don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. Dad, look, I don't know what you're doing, but we need to talk. We can't keep going like this. The apartment, the bills, the car, everything is falling apart. If this is about yesterday, I'm sorry. I really am. But you can't just shut us out like this. Please, call me back. I paused the message, sat back in my chair, thought for a moment, then deleted it. In the afternoon, I went to the shed to keep working on the bench. The repetition of sanding, shaping, fitting pieces together, it kept my mind steady. Every now and then I'd hear the muffled vibration of my phone from across the room, but I didn't check it. Not until much later, when the project reached a stopping point and daylight began to fade from the windows. When I looked at my phone again, I saw something different, something I had expected but didn't think would happen so soon. A message from a number I didn't recognize, but the preview showed the first line. This is Officer Ramirez with the 14th Precinct. My eyebrows lifted slightly. That was new. I tapped the voicemail and listened carefully. The officer's tone was polite, professional, and pointed. Mr. Morgan, I'm calling because your son and his wife contacted us regarding a financial dispute connected to the trust in your accounts. We explained that this isn't a criminal matter and that we cannot compel you to contact them. However, they seemed extremely distressed. If you feel comfortable, we would appreciate a brief confirmation that they are not in any immediate danger. Thank you. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the shed wall for a few long seconds. They had gone to the police. Not because they were in danger, but because they hoped authority would force me to fix their mess. That was when I realized something important. They weren't just panicking, they were unraveling. And not slowly, rapidly. I walked out of the shed, locked it behind me, and headed back toward the house. The porch light clicked on automatically as I reached the steps. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. Dad, we're driving to your house. We need to talk. Please just let us in. I stopped at the door, stared at the screen. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the air had that cool evening bite that always settled early on my property. I stood on the porch for a moment, watching the sky fade from orange to deep gray, listening to the slow hum of insects starting their nightly chorus. It should have been peaceful. It would have been peaceful, if not for the message burning on my phone. We're driving to your house. We need to talk. Please just let us in. I didn't reply. I didn't plan to. But I also wasn't naive. People like Daniel and Lily didn't drive 2 hours to ask for a talk. They came to demand solutions, to make noise, to scrape together whatever leverage they thought they still had. And for the first time in their lives, they were about to learn that noise doesn't move a man who's finally learned to live in silence. I stepped inside and locked the door, not out of fear, but out of habit. Old houses like mine have big doors, heavy latches, thick wood. When they close, they make a sound you feel in your chest. I walked through the hallway, switching lights on as I went, letting the warm glow fill the living room. Everything in my house was in its place, organized, steady, grounded. It stood in complete contrast to the chaos Daniel and Lily were spinning themselves into. At 7:15, my security system chimed. A soft alert on my watch, vehicle approaching front gate. I walked to the front room and parted the curtains just enough to see the headlights turning slowly onto the long gravel driveway. Even from a distance, I could tell their car wasn't riding smoothly. It dipped slightly on one side, the suspension whining as they crawled forward. The Cayenne had been taken earlier that day, so they must have borrowed or rented something. Maybe even used an older car they'd ignored for years. A fitting metaphor for their life, luxury gone, reality creeping back in through the seams. The car stopped just outside the gate, headlights casting long, sharp beams across the gravel. They didn't honk. They didn't get out right away. They just sat there, probably arguing, probably rehearsing, probably convincing themselves they still had some kind of power in this situation. I stayed where I was and waited. Let them build their courage. Let them feel the weight of the silence pressing in on them. Eventually, the driver door opened. Daniel stepped out first. Even at a distance, I could see the slump in his shoulders, the frantic energy in the way he ran his hand through his hair. Lily got out slower, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her movements small and tense. They approached the gate together, and Daniel pressed the intercom button. Once, twice, 5 times, 10. I didn't move. My security system counted the presses and, just as it was designed to do, automatically triggered a secondary alert. Gate intercom activated excessively. It was funny how calmly it reported what, in reality, looked like 2 people pounding on the gate of a man they'd pushed away 24 hours earlier. The intercom crackled. "Dad, I know you're home. Please open the gate." I didn't respond. I watched him shift on his feet, glance at Lily, then press the button again. "Dad, come on, we need to talk. This is serious." Lily stepped closer to the intercom, her voice sharp enough to cut through the night. "Elias, open the gate. We're freezing out here." Her tone wasn't asking. It was demanding. The same tone she used whenever she wanted something bought, fixed, or paid for. I let the silence answer them. Daniel pressed the button again, harder this time. "Dad, please, just open the gate. We're not leaving." I stepped away from the window. Let them think I wasn't watching. Let them believe whatever they needed to. The power was in the uncertainty, not the confrontation. 20 minutes passed like that. Calls, intercom presses, raised voices that carried faintly across the property. Finally, I heard the crunch of gravel under their shoes as they began pacing along the fence line, searching for a weak spot, a way in. There wasn't one. The wall was 10 feet high in places, stone and reinforced iron, built for privacy and protection. Not against intruders, but against people who mistook access for entitlement. I knew the moment they reached the side of the property. Daniel's voice cut through the air, distorted but loud. "Dad, I can see you. I know you're out there." I was out there, but not where he thought. I stood quietly on the second-floor balcony, hidden in the shadows, watching them through the gaps in the trees. Lily's voice rose next, shaky, frantic. "We're going to lose everything. Do you understand that? Everything. Everything." That word had always meant money to her. Not home, not family, not dignity, just money. They stayed there for almost half an hour, pacing, shouting, pleading, demanding. A full cycle of emotions. Anger, frustration, fear, fake remorse, bargaining, accusation. Each one falling flat into the cold evening air. None of it touched me. None of it felt personal anymore. Noise without weight. At 8:15, the security patrol car pulled onto the road. A black sedan with a quiet engine and bright white headlights. The officer stepped out. Marcus, a man who knew how to stay calm around people who had lost theirs. I stayed where I was as he approached them. From a distance, all I could see were gestures. Daniel pointing at the house, Lily waving her hands in sharp, frantic motions. Marcus listened, nodded, then pointed to the gate sign, "Private property. No trespassing." violators subject to removal. When Daniel kept arguing, Marcus stepped slightly between them and the gate. His posture never changed, but the message was clear. You don't belong here anymore. Eventually, their energy broke. Lily cried in frustration. Daniel tried one last time, shouting into the cold air, "Dad, please just talk to us." But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. They walked back to the car, defeated, exhausted, running on the fumes of a life that no longer existed. I watched their taillights disappear into the darkness, swallowed by the long stretch of empty road. The night became quiet again. Still, almost peaceful. Inside the house, I turned off the porch lights, locked the door, and stood in the dim hallway for a few seconds. My phone buzzed once, just once, with a new voicemail. I knew what it would be. Apologies wrapped in panic. Promises wrapped in fear. Pleas wrapped in entitlement. But I didn't play it. I didn't need to. The message wasn't for me. It was for the person they thought I still was. The man who would rush to fix everything, no matter how badly they treated him. That man was gone. The night after they showed up at my gate, I slept better than I had in years. No tossing, no staring at the ceiling, no replaying old conversations in my head. I lay down, closed my eyes, and my body finally believed me when I said, "We're done." When morning came, I woke up before the alarm, rested, clear, and for a few seconds I even forgot about the chaos swirling on the other side of my phone. Then I checked it. 12 missed calls. 4 voicemails. 8 new texts. Nothing surprising. Just the storm trying again. I made coffee first and only looked at the screen while the machine hummed. The previews followed the same pattern as before, panic trying to dress itself up as logic. From Daniel, "We didn't mean what we said. You're taking this too far. We were just overwhelmed." From Lily, "This is cruel. You're punishing us. We're your family." That last one made me pause, not because it moved me, but because of when she chose to say it. Family hadn't mattered much when they were driving off in the Porsche, dismissing me like an uncomfortable piece of furniture. Now that the floor was gone, suddenly the word family was front and center. I let the messages sit and sat down at the table with my coffee. Routine first, crisis later. Or not at all. Around 9, my phone rang again, this time from Mark. I answered. "Morning," he said, getting straight to it. "I assume you've seen the activity on your end." "They came to the gate last night," I said. "Didn't get in." He exhaled quietly. "I figured something like that would happen. Their side has been busy too. I've had calls from their bank, the building office, and, believe it or not, from a lawyer they contacted." "They already lawyered up?" I asked. He gave a dry little laugh. "If you can call it that. Some general practice guy who clearly didn't read the documents before he tried to sound threatening. He demanded to know why their assets were being frozen without consent." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," Mark said. "That these aren't their assets. That you, as the grantor and trustee, have full power. That distributions are discretionary, not guaranteed. And that there is no legal obligation for you to continue funding 2 adults who told you to stay out of their lives." I could almost see the expression on Mark's face as he said it. Calm, confident, unbothered. "How did he take it?" I asked. "Poorly," Mark said. "But your son and his wife are going to have to accept something they've never had to accept before. They were never the owners. They were passengers." And the driver finally pulled over. We went over a few technical details, account closures, title transfers, deadlines for certain automatic payments to fully stop. Nothing dramatic. Just finishing what we started. Before hanging up, Mark said, "Elias, I know this isn't easy, but from where I'm standing, it's necessary. Don't backpedal now." "I'm not," I said, and I meant it. Later that day, while I was in the garage sorting through some old boxes, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar contact. The preview said, "Hey, it's Tom. Could we talk about Daniel?" Tom was an old friend of Daniel's, a guy I'd watched grow up in my house almost as much as my own son. I wiped my hands, picked up the phone, and called him back. He answered quickly. "Mr. Morgan? Hey, sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me," I said. "What's going on?" There was a pause, the kind you hear when someone's trying to pick the right side of the fence. Daniel called me," he said. "He's not in a good place. He said you cut him off completely. Said he and Lily are about to lose the apartment, that the car got taken, that you're retaliating." I leaned against the workbench. "And what do you think?" I asked. Another pause. "Honestly, I think you enabled him for a long time. We all saw it. None of us said anything. But he's still your kid." I appreciated his honesty more than his attempt at softening the message. Tom, do you remember who paid his rent in college when he didn't have a job? I asked. You did, he said quietly. And who covered his first move? His first business idea? His second? You did. And when he and Lily decided the starter apartment wasn't good enough, who co-signed the lease and covered the difference? You did. He sighed. Yeah, I get it. I'm not kicking a child out into the street, I said. I'm stepping back from two adults who told me they want space. It's time they figure out what that actually feels like. Tom didn't argue. Okay, he said. I just wanted to make sure you knew how bad it's getting. I do, I replied. They're supposed to be feeling it. That's how people grow when nothing else worked. He exhaled again, softer this time. All right, I won't get in the middle. Just take care of yourself, okay? You too, Tom, I said, and ended the call. By late afternoon, I had a clear picture of the timeline. The trust was sealed, the car was gone, their credit lines were cut, and the building was days away from making their situation official. And right on schedule, it happened. 2 days later, as I sat in my living room reading, Mark sent me a photo. No message, no explanation. Just an image. It was a picture of a notice taped to an apartment door, bold letters at the top. Notice to vacate. Tenant, Daniel and Lillian Morgan. Underneath, in smaller print, a line that made my jaw tighten despite everything. Primary payer, Morgan Family Trust. They had probably been out when it was posted. Coming home, maybe, with cheap takeout instead of their usual delivered meals. Maybe arguing in the elevator about whose fault it was. Maybe still believing there would be some last-minute miracle. And then they would have seen the paper on the door. Neighbors walking past with their eyes pretending not to look, but looking anyway. That paper wasn't just a notice. It was a public label. A loud, silent announcement. You are not who you think you are anymore. That evening, the messages changed. Less anger. Less accusation. More raw fear. We got an eviction notice. We have 30 days. We can't cover it. We don't even have enough for a deposit somewhere else. Please, I'm begging you. Just help us this one last time, and we'll figure it out from there. Lily tried a different angle. If you do this, everyone will know what kind of father you are. Is that what you want? I read that one twice. Not because it hurt, but because of how backwards it was. For years, I've been worried about what kind of father I was. It was why I gave and gave and gave. Now, for the first time, I felt like I might actually be doing the job right. A week passed. They didn't drive up again. Maybe they were too ashamed. Maybe they were too busy packing. Maybe they were burning through whatever short-term favors they still had left. I lived my routine. I worked in the garden. I met Mark twice to finalize some longer-term restructuring. We discussed not just cutting them off, but what to do with everything I had built, where it should go, who it should help, what kind of legacy I wanted my name attached to when all was said and done. Those were conversations I should have had years earlier. But sometimes pain opens doors comfort never touches. On the 10th day after the gate incident, I got another unexpected call. This time from my sister, Karen. We weren't especially close, but we stayed in touch. She didn't waste time. What did you do? She asked as soon as I picked up. I didn't pretend not to understand. Set some boundaries, I said. About 30 years too late. She sighed. Daniel called me. Lily too. They're saying you're letting them get thrown out on the street, that you're cutting them off completely, that you've changed. I have, I said. Finally. Elias, she said, dropping her tone. I know he's been ungrateful. I know she's a handful. Believe me, I've seen it at holidays. But are you sure this is the way? Let me ask you something, I said. If he had called and said, we've lost everything, but we're ready to start over. We'll take any job, any small place. We just want your advice. What do you think I would have done? You'd have driven there yourself, she admitted. Exactly, I said. But that's not what happened. They drove a luxury SUV I paid for, looked me in the eye on my birthday, and told me not to contact them ever again. Then they went back to the life I bought them and only considered me again when the money stopped. They don't miss me, Karen. They miss the lifestyle. She went quiet for a moment. So what now? She finally asked. Now, I said. They learn what their life looks like without me holding it up. She didn't push further. I had to ask, she said softly. I know, I replied. And you're a good aunt for worrying. But this time, I'm not stepping in. All right, she said. I won't interfere. Just leave a little room, in case he ever comes back different. That, I said, is the only thing I'm leaving on the table. 10 days after the eviction notice, Mark sent me another update. They've cleared out, he said over the phone. Handed over the keys. No damages, surprisingly. I think they were too focused on survival to trash the place. Where did they go? I asked. Don't know. Not to another property linked to you. That's all I can say for certain. I thanked him and hung up. That night was quiet. No calls. No messages. No notifications. Just silence. For most people, that would be a relief. For me, it was something else. It was a question. Had they finally accepted it? Or were they just regrouping? The answer came the next morning, in the form of an email from Mark with a subject line that made me sit up straighter. Thought you'd want to see this. Inside was a PDF, an official-looking document from a Laurent law office. It was a formal request for reconsideration and restoration of benefits from Daniel and Lily. A polite way of saying, we're demanding you turn the tap back on. The wording tried to sound professional, but you could still feel Lily's fingerprints all over it. Phrases like abandonment, emotional harm, unreasonable hardship. At the end, the lawyer had added a note asking for a meeting to resolve the issue amicably before escalation. I finished reading and leaned back in my chair. Even now, even with the floor gone, they thought this was still a negotiation. That word, benefits, stuck with me. They didn't see my support as sacrifice. They saw it as a package they were entitled to. I forwarded the email back to Mark with one line. No response. No meeting. A minute later, he replied, understood. I thought that would be the end of it for the week. I was wrong. Because that same afternoon, as I was in the living room tightening a loose screw on a chair, my security system chimed again. Not a vehicle this time. Foot traffic. A single person walking up to the gate. The outer camera showed a man in a suit, holding a brown envelope, looking around with that mix of curiosity and discomfort people get when they're on someone else's land. I watched him press the intercom, hold it, then release. No voice. Just the action. I didn't answer. After a moment, he took the envelope, slid it through the small mail slot built into the gate's frame, glanced at the house one last time, and walked away. I waited until the system told me he was clear. Then I stepped outside, walked down the front path, and picked up the envelope. My name was printed on the front. Inside, I already knew what I'd find. Papers, proposals, maybe even threats. I carried the envelope back inside and set it on the dining table. For a moment, I just stood there looking at it, the paper still cold from the evening air. There was nothing dramatic about the way it sat there, but something in my chest tightened anyway. I opened it slowly, expecting more legal jargon or another desperate attempt wrapped in official language. But the first page wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't typed. It wasn't even neat. It was a handwritten letter. From Daniel. I sat down and read it. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, like he'd written it in the middle of the night. He started with the usual lines, confusion, fear, the financial freefall, but then the tone shifted. He wrote about the apartment being empty now, about sleeping on a friend's couch, about Lily breaking down after they handed over the keys. He said he couldn't recognize his own life anymore. Then he wrote something I'd never seen from him in years. I don't know who I am without all the things you provided. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was touching, but because it was true. He ended the letter by saying he didn't want money, not right now. He said he wanted clarity. He wanted to understand why I would let things get this bad. And at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, almost an afterthought, if there's anything left in you that still sees me as your son, please talk to me. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. It would have been easy to crumble it, to throw it away, to say he was manipulating me again. But for the first time, the panic in his words wasn't coded in arrogance. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a threat. It was something raw, something he didn't know how to control. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the yard was quiet. The porch light washed the driveway in a soft circle of gold. For years, I had dreamed of hearing something real from him, something honest. And here it was, delivered by a man who still didn't know how to ask for help without falling apart. But I also knew this wasn't the moment to respond. Not yet. Not while the lesson was still unfolding. Not while he was only halfway down the road he needed to walk. I wasn't going to punish him, but I wasn't going to rescue him, either. That balance, that thin line, was the choice I had avoided for decades. I put the envelope in a drawer and closed it slowly. For the next 2 days, I didn't touch the envelope again. I didn't reread the letter or analyze the handwriting or try to decode what was genuine and what was survival instinct. I left it in the drawer by the dining table and forced myself to focus on normal life, Morning walks, tending to the yard, finishing the bench in the shed. Anything that reminded me the world didn't revolve around Daniel's chaos. And for the first time, it actually felt true. Still, the silence didn't stretch as long as I'd hoped. On the third evening, as I was closing the blinds in the living room, my phone buzzed. Not a text, not a voicemail, but a direct call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. A man's voice responded. Older, calm, professional. Mr. Morgan? My name is Frank Lewis. I'm a counselor at the community center here in town. I frowned, unsure where this was going. How can I help you? Your son asked me to call, he said gently. He's here with me now. He didn't want to come to your home unannounced again, so he asked if I would reach out on his behalf. I didn't speak immediately. I wasn't angry, just surprised. He's with you, I repeated. Yes, Lewis said. He asked for help earlier today. He's been staying with a friend. Said things have been difficult lately. The man was being careful with his words. Too careful. Is he safe? I asked. Yes, he said quickly. Physically, yes. Emotionally, he's overwhelmed. He said he wrote you a letter. He wasn't sure if you read it. I did, I said. There was a short pause on the other end. He's asking if you'd be willing to meet. Somewhere neutral. Not about money. Just to talk. His tone was soft, measured, the voice of someone trained to defuse people on both sides of a conflict. Mr. Morgan, I want to be clear. Your son isn't in danger. But he's lost. And he's finally saying it out loud. I let the silence sit. Not to intimidate him, but because I was weighing something I hadn't had the space to consider before. The idea of seeing Daniel face to face again. Not the entitled version, not the loud one, not the version shaped by comfort and expectation, but the stripped-down human being left after everything collapsed. That version. I wasn't sure I knew him. The counselor spoke again, gently. If you choose not to meet him, that is absolutely your right. I just promised him I would call. I exhaled slowly. Where? There's a small cafe off Oak Ridge Road, he said. Quiet place. We could be there in 20 minutes. I hesitated. A long moment. Not because I doubted what to do, but because for the first time, I realized I wasn't responding from anger anymore. I wasn't responding from guilt either. The ground inside me was steady and level. All right, I said. 20 minutes. When I hung up, I didn't rush. I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that wakes you fully. I drove with the windows cracked just enough to hear the wind, keeping the speed steady, no hurry in the engine. The cafe was almost empty when I arrived, a small brick building with warm lights and fogged windows. As I parked, I saw them inside. Daniel sitting at a table near the back, the counselor beside him. Daniel looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just smaller in presence. I walked in. The bell over the door chimed softly. Daniel looked up instantly. I saw it. The nervous swallow, the way he straightened his back, the way his fingers tightened around the edge of the table. He was afraid, but not of me. He was afraid of what the moment might reveal. Mr. Morgan, the counselor said with a polite nod. Thank you for coming. I nodded back, then pulled out the chair across from Daniel. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me, searching for something in my expression. Maybe anger, maybe forgiveness, maybe anything he could read as an opening. Thanks for coming, he said finally. His voice was softer than I remembered, less practiced, less sure of itself. I didn't say anything yet. I just waited. It forced him to continue. I know everything's a mess, he said. I know that. And I know we messed up. I messed up. I didn't see how bad things had gotten. I didn't understand what I was doing to you. I kept my face neutral, not harsh, not soft, just present. Daniel swallowed hard. Lily, she's staying with her sister for now. We're not doing great. Money's gone. Apartment's gone. Everything's different. The counselor stepped back slightly, giving space. Daniel pressed on. I'm not here to demand anything, he said. Not money. Not the trust. None of that. His voice thinned. I don't want to lose you. That sentence landed heavier than I expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't polished. It wasn't a line. It was raw, awkward, honest. I leaned back in my chair. Daniel, I said quietly, you didn't lose me. You pushed me away. He nodded instantly, like he'd been waiting to agree. I know. I was stupid. Angry. I thought. I don't know what I thought. I raised an eyebrow. You told me not to contact you. On my birthday. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. And then you expected everything to stay the same afterward. I know. he said again, almost whispering. I know how it sounds now. I let a beat pass before asking the question I'd carried for years. Daniel, when did you stop seeing me as your father? The counselor tensed slightly at the sharpness of the question. Daniel froze. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked down, fingers rubbing the edge of the table. I didn't stop seeing you as my father, he said quietly. I just stopped seeing myself as someone who could take care of anything on my own. He looked up, eyes tired. And the more you helped, the more afraid I got to stand on my own. And the more I depended on you, the more I resented you. That honesty hit harder than anything he'd said so far. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. For the last month, he said, voice shaky, I've been living a life I don't know how to live. A real life. A small life. And I'm learning things I should have learned 20 years ago. He let out a nervous laugh. Do you know how embarrassing it is that I didn't even know how to ask for an extension on a utility bill? I didn't smile, but I felt something shift inside me. He continued, I'm not asking you to fix anything. I need to know if there's still a chance we can talk. Not as bank and beneficiary, just as father and son. The counselor watched me, waiting. I took a slow breath and looked directly at my son. The man, not the child I kept saving. There can be, I said. But not if you're waiting for the old life to come back. That's gone. It's not coming back. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand. And not if you think talking to me earns you access to the trust. His eyes didn't flinch this time. I don't want the trust. For once. I believed him. We sat in silence for a moment. Not tense. Just unfamiliar, like two people stepping into a room neither of them had ever been in before. Finally, I said, we can start with small things. Conversations. Not money. Not help. Just conversations. He nodded again, this time with relief that softened his shoulders. Okay, he said. I can do that. The counselor smiled slightly, sensing the shift. This is a good first step, he said quietly. I stood up, and Daniel stood with me. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he held out his hand. Not confidently, not assuming, just offering. I shook it. As I turned to leave, I knew something important. I wasn't rebuilding the old relationship. I was building a new one that might actually survive. When I stepped outside, the evening air hit me again, cold, grounding, honest. In the weeks after that meeting at the cafe, life didn't suddenly turn into some heartwarming movie. There were no dramatic hugs in the rain, no overnight transformation, no perfect apologies that fixed 30 years of imbalance. What I got instead was something smaller, slower, rough around the edges, but real. Daniel started calling once a week. Not every day, not constantly, just once. The first calls were stiff, full of long pauses and awkward small talk. He'd ask how I was. I'd ask where he was working. At first, there wasn't much to say. He'd picked up shifts at a warehouse on the edge of the city, long hours, low pay, sore muscles. The kind of job that doesn't care who your father is or what car you used to drive. It only cares if you show up. He didn't complain much. Not the old way. He didn't talk about what he deserved. Instead, he talked about how tired he was, how early the morning shift felt, how heavy the boxes were the first few days. But there was something in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time, a trace of rough pride. The kind a man gets when he knows, at the end of the day, that he got through it on his own. I listened. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't ask if he needed money. I didn't suggest better jobs or hand him contacts. I just let him talk, and sometimes I talked back. It was new, uncomfortable in places, but honest. I saw him in person a few times too. Short visits. Coffee, not dinners. Small diners, not expensive restaurants. He wore cheaper clothes, different shoes, a simple watch. No designer labels, no careful performance. Just a man trying to figure out how to exist without leaning on invisible support beams. Lily didn't come with him. Not once. I didn't ask why. He didn't offer. Mark and I met one last time in his office on a cloudy Tuesday afternoon. The trust file sat between us like it always had, thick and heavy and full of decisions. He adjusted his glasses and flipped to the last section we'd left open. So, he said, we need to finalize this. On the page, in clean black ink, were the terms we discussed over the past few weeks. The majority of the money, the part that had carried Daniel and Lily for years, was being diverted for good, into something I'd chosen slowly, carefully. A fund for kids who grew up like I did, not like Daniel did. A scholarship. Practical, targeted, clean. Trade schools, technical programs, small business grants. Money for people who knew what it meant to start with nothing and weren't asking for a shortcut, just a chance. At the top of the section, my name. At the bottom, a blank line waiting for my signature. And Daniel? Mark asked quietly, do you want to leave anything directly to him in the long term? That was the part one hadn't rushed. Not out of pettiness, but because I'd spent a lot of nights staring at the ceiling, thinking about what legacy really meant. Leaving a fortune to a man who didn't know how to hold it had nearly destroyed him. Cutting him off completely had hurt him, but for the first time in his life, it had also forced him to stand up. Somewhere between those two extremes, there had to be a line that made sense. I'll leave something, I said finally. But not the life he lost. A seed, not a finished house. Enough to build with, not enough to drown in. Mark nodded, understanding. We adjusted a few clauses, no automatic disbursements, no monthly payments, no guarantees. Instead, conditional access. A smaller share, delayed. Tied to age, to stability, to proof that he could keep what he was given. Not hoops for him to jump through just to satisfy my ego, but guardrails to stop him from driving straight off the same cliff twice. When everything looked right, Mark handed me the pen. This is it, he said. Once you sign, this becomes the map. I breathed out slowly and signed my name. Nothing exploded. No lightning flashed. The world didn't tilt. It was just ink on paper. But somewhere, quietly, the story changed. On my drive home, the sky was overcast, the roads damp from a light rain that had passed through earlier. I rolled the window down slightly and let the cool air in. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt lighter. Not because I'd punished anyone. Because, for the first time, I knew exactly where everything was going. The house welcomed me back with its familiar stillness. I hung my jacket, put on a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the hum of the machine in the background. My phone was face down on the wood. I hadn't checked it since I left Mark's office. When the coffee was ready, I poured myself a cup, then finally flipped the phone over. One missed call. One new message. From Daniel. I opened it. Got offered a promotion at the warehouse. Supervisor role. Smaller pay than I used to have, but I earned it this time. I thought you'd want to know. No emojis. No requests. No complaints. Just a simple report from a man who had done something on his own and, for the first time, maybe believed that I cared more about that than whatever car he was driving. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a moment. I could have written a lot. I could have turned it into a lesson, a speech, a moment of deep emotional bonding. Instead, I typed one sentence. Good. I'm glad you took it. I hit send. His reply came a minute later. Thanks, Dad. I stared at that word for a long time. It looked different than before. Less like a tool, more like a bridge. A bridge that wasn't finished, might never be finished, but was at least pointed in the right direction. Later that night, as I sat in the living room with the lights low, the house quiet, I found myself thinking back to the day it all started. The Porsche, the cafe, the words that had cut through 30 years in a single moment. Don't contact us again. We can't take this anymore. He hadn't known what he was saying then. Now, I wasn't sure he fully understood what he was building. I walked to the drawer, pulled it open, and took out the envelope with his first letter. I didn't read it this time. I just held it for a moment, then set it back and closed the drawer. The trust was no longer his safety net. The money was no longer his shadow. The future, that was up to him. As for me, I had my own ending to write. My own legacy to finish. A generation I'd never meet would feel the weight of my decisions. Kids in work boots and cheap uniforms. Girls with calloused hands and big plans. Men who'd never had a father to sign a check for them. Only the will to try again after failing. Somewhere between all of them and the son who once told me to disappear, my name would live on. Whether Daniel ever knew the full shape of what I'd done, I wasn't sure. I didn't know if I'd ever sit him down and explain. I didn't know if he'd hate me for it one day or thank me. Maybe both. Maybe neither. That was the mystery I'd have to live with. My phone buzzed once more on the table. Another message from Daniel. Maybe we could grab coffee again next week. Same place? I looked at it for a moment, then set the phone down without answering right away. I wasn't ignoring him this time. I was simply taking a second to enjoy something I hadn't felt in a long time. Choice. When I finally picked the phone back up, I started typing a reply. And for once, the story didn't feel like it was ending. It felt like it was finally beginning. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below, and don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.